I'm going to show you a technique for short rows that is known as German short rows. Sometimes it's called double stitch short rows. And in my thinking, in order to not get it confused and to help me remember the process of this short row technique, I call it the pull up method. Short rows are a method which cause extra fabric to be made in your project so that instead of being a rectangular shape, you can build some curves into your fabric and to add some volume into what your fabric will look like. Sometimes that's in the back neckline of a sweater, or to cause a hat to slouch extra, you make a little bit of a puff or a bag of fabric. Sometimes it's at the top of the shoulder shaping for a sleeve. Short rows are in the heel of socks and toes often. And let's see. Oh, and also in like baby rompers, things like that, for accommodating a diaper or something in the roundness of the bottom. So I've got here a stockinette stitch swatch that I've started, and I am going to knit to 5 stitches before the end. And on this sample, I'm going to create short rows that make this fabric do a curve that grows from the narrow ends here and will curve up like this. So yeah, I'm going to knit to almost the end of this row and then do the short rows and turn around. So I'm really working only in this middle section, and gradually I'm working fewer and fewer stitches in this middle section, and that's why it builds up in sort of an ellipse way. All right, so I'm going to knit over here until there are 5 stitches left. And then, here we go, I'm going to turn this around. Turn your work around. And then you slip the stitch from your left hand needle to your right hand needle, like so. And then the pull up portion of this is why I think of it as the pull up method, is that you pull your yarn over the top of the needle. And what happens when you do that is that your stitch, the one stitch, the stitch below it becomes stretched around your needle, and it turns into these 2 wraps around your needle. So do it one more time. And that's why I think sometimes it's called the double stitch, because this becomes a double stitch. Where there was 1 stitch, there are now 2 wraps. And then because we're on the back side of this stockinette stitch, we're going to need to purl to the other end of our piece. So I wrap the yarn to the back, and then I'm going to move it to the front in order to purl to the other end of my swatch. Go until there are 5 stitches left at this end of my piece. 2, 4, 5, so 4 more. All right, and then once I've reached the point where I'm ready to do my short turn, I'm going to turn my work around, slip the stitch from my left needle to my right needle, like so. Oh, just a moment. You need to bring your yarn to the front. Then you slip the needle from the left stitch or left needle to your right needle, and then you pull this yarn over the top. So now you can see here again, you've got where there was one stitch here, when you pull this yarn over the top, it becomes two. This one's a little twisted, so if I open it up there, you can see 1, 2 wraps. And then we're going to knit now, so I don't need to bring my yarn to the front. I'm just going to knit across. And then I will go until this time. I think I'll go 2 stitches before the double stitch on the other end. So the first double stitch that we did, I'm going to stop 2 stitches before that. Okay, so here's the double stitch. You can see it sort of looks like a little V, and then I'm going to stop 2 stitches before that and turn my work around. My yarn is already in the front because I was just knitting, and I've turned it, so I'm going to slip my stitch from the left needle to the right needle and then pull up and over with my working yarn to the back. So there's 1 stitch. When I pull the yarn over, it looks like a double stitch, and then I bring it to the front now so I can purl back down to the other end 2 stitches before the double stitch. That number will vary depending on your instructions. Your short rows will have you knit until sometimes just right up until that double stitch. Sometimes it will be a few stitches before that double stitch. So that part will vary in your instructions. Alright, so here's my double stitch. You can see it's kind of thicker and 2 strands of yarn there. And then I'm going to stop with these 2 to go. Turn my work around, bring my yarn to the front, and then slip this most recent stitch from the left side to the right side, and then pull this yarn, my working yarn, over the top to the back. So I'm pulling the working yarn over the top and it's stretching out the stitch below that most recent stitch, and it's making it stretch both of its legs over the top of the knitting needle. Alright, and then I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before the most recent pullover stitch or most recent double stitch on my knitted side. Okay, so here is my double stitch here, and there are the 2 before it. So I'll stop here and then turn my work. My yarn is already in the front, so now I'm going to slip the stitch from my left needle to the right needle and pull my working yarn up and over my needle and to the front so that I'm ready to purl. And guess what I'm going to do? I'm going to purl until 2 stitches before the last time I did a pullover stitch on the purl side. So here is the pullover stitch. 1, 2, so 1 more purl to go. I'm going to turn my work, bring the yarn to the front, and then slip my stitch. Slip it from the left to the right, and then pull this over the top. Then I'm going to knit to 2 stitches before this double stitch. So I've got 1 more to go. Turn around, slip the stitch from the left to the right, pull the working yarn up and over, ready to purl back to 2 stitches before my double stitch. Now in this case it's really close now. We've worked our way up from 5 stitches from the end down here, and gradually we've gotten to this almost to the middle here. So here's my most recent double stitch on the purl side, and I want to leave 2. So I'm just going to purl this 1 stitch here, and then turn my work and bring this to the front. Slip this one over, and then pull over that working yarn to create the double stitch here. And then I'm ready to start resolving. So as you can see, the fabric in the center section here has had all these extra rows back and forth built up in stockinette stitch. So that's going to cause these rows, or these stitches out here, to have fewer rows worked. All right, so here we go. When you come to resolving these stitches, what you do is, on the knit side, you knit them together. So you count that as a wrap stitch. You knit it as if you're knitting 2 stitches together. So we'll have wrapped that double stitch. We have 2 in between, and then we come up to another double stitch. So we're going to knit that together, 2 regular knits, knit 2 together, 2 regular knits, knit 2 together, and then knit to the end. These 5 stitches haven't been worked since I started the video. All right, so then you've come to the end of that row, and then we turn over, of course, so we can purl back. And if you're working in the round, you've got, you'll just knit around or work around your whole piece and do the knit 2 togethers at every time you come to a double stitch. But in this case, since our swatch is flat, we're going to go back, and it also gives me the chance to show you how to work those double stitches if you're working in the flat and you come to them as though they're purls. So now this half of my swatch is resolved, and I'm just going to work it just like I work stockinette stitch, purling on the wrong side. And then when I come to a double stitch, here comes the double stitch, we can work that as a purl 2 together. So you see there's a double stitch, this one here. Looks kind of crazy on my needle. So then I just purl those together like that. The 2 strands, you just purl them together. Purl 2 stitches in between, and then purl these 2 again. That's a double stitch. Purl those 2. Purl 2 regular stitches. Purl this double stitch. And then we've got 5, so we're going to purl these last 5 unworked stitches, or previously unworked stitches. And then we've got to the end. Now, the swatch is going to be a little difficult to lay out at this point, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to work a couple of rows of stockinette stitch away from this short row in here, and then I'll come back and I'll show you how the shape of this swatch is affected. So here is the piece. After I resolved the short rows on the purl back, I knit 2 rows in stockinette stitch and bound off at the top edge. So it's really easy to see how it forms a curve and really builds up the middle section of this fabric. The short rows began, let's see, here and here, and then they just gradually worked up. So then this section right in here, I guess right there to here, is where you have extra fabric than you do on the outside edges. And so that's what the German short rows accomplish, or the double stitch short rows, or the pull up short rows. And on the back, this is what it looks like. You can see it a little more clearly on the back, how the double stitches look a little bit bulkier because they've got a little extra fabric wrapping around the back side of those stitches. So there you go. So you can see how you might like this on the top of a shaped shoulder, or in a more elongated stitch count. It can be nice on the back neckline of a sweater to bring up the back of the garment a little bit. It would be less exaggerated across more stitches. So anyway, maybe give it a try. Make a swatch and just see how you like it. All right, thank you. Bye-bye.